Hey everyone, Shawn here from the Automation Blog and School, and in this episode of the Automation Podcast, I sit down with Keith Hogan from Rockwell Automation to get an update on their PanelView 5000 line of HMIs. Keith, thank you for coming on the Automation Podcast to tell us all about the PanelView 5000 series of HMIs. I'm really excited to learn about this line. We just did a series of like a dozen articles over at theautomationblog.com. And so I really appreciate you coming on the show to tell us about not only about what the PanelView 5000 series of HMIs is, but also maybe some of the new things coming out later this year. But before we get into those details, could you just tell our audience who you are?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me on, Shawn. I appreciate it. And so, yeah, my name is Keith Hogan. I'm the product manager for the View 5000 software. So that includes ViewDesigner, the development tool for the PanelView 5000, and the runtime on the PanelView 5000 itself.
Awesome. Now let's jump into the details you have here for us.
All right, sure thing. So I'll get just a couple of slides on the PanelView 5000 hardware itself. And most of the time we'll spend talking about ViewDesigner and just the whole benefits behind the platform. And then we'll finish up with a little bit of a sneak peek at what's coming in our next release, which you'll see later this year.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
All right. So hardware-wise, there are two different flavors available of the PanelView 5000. There's the PanelView 5310. It's a smaller panel, talks to one controller, available in a range of sizes, 6-inch to 12-inch, a few wide versions in there. You can go up to 100 screens on this one. And we do have a lot of conformally coded versions available for this. On the 5510, kind of the bigger brother, a wider range of sizes. We go 7-inch to 19-inch on this one. It does have two Ethernet ports built into it, and that's specifically to do device level ring. So if you want to do a DLR setup on the 5510, it just inherently supports it. It's a dual core processor. It's got a little more power and can connect up to 4 controllers. Same idea once again. Conformally coded versions are available for that.
So if you needed a bigger version or you needed to talk to multiple controllers, you would always choose the 5510 over the 5310.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. 5510 is the PanelView then.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and you'll see when we talk about version 8 too, our next release coming up, we're starting to implement some features that we can only do on the 5510. And so you'll see some more of that there are certain things that we just can't do on the 5310, and the 5510 will support those. When we talk about the development software, ViewDesigner, it is part of the Studio 5000 family. And so, what I always like to say is, if you have Logix Designer today, you have ViewDesigner. So starting with V27 of Logix Designer, we started shipping ViewDesigner along with that. There's no additional activation. There's no additional cost. I know that's hard to believe from Rockwell, but one of our driving factors behind this whole development is tight integration with Logix. And so we take that all the way down to even how you get the software, right? And so, I would encourage everyone, if they want to start looking at it, open up your Logix Designer, your Studio 5000 package today, and you'll see that you can start creating ViewDesigner projects also. The layout of the software itself, much more modern. So you've got, on the left hand here, you've got your Project Explorer, which is where all your content lives. Your toolbox, which is thousands of elements that you could drop on screens. Your properties pane over on the right. So the properties pane is always available, which makes a lot of workflows just easier to run through. And then your main canvas editing area in the middle. And so if we start talking about some of those benefits and values, so like I said, one of our main drivers is integration with Logix. How do we make it so that if you use our controllers, you use our PanelView 5000, you put those together, you just start getting value. And so one of the things you start with is just, hey, when I create a ViewDesigner project, one of the very first things I do is I tie it to a Logix Designer project. And that actually sets up a live link between those two. And so I can go into Logix Designer, do an edit and add 10 new tags. I hit save. Within 15 seconds, those tags will show up the next time I browse tags in ViewDesigner. There's no synchronization step you have to do. There's no import export. They just work together. And that even includes not just what you think of normal tags, a name and a value. It also includes all the extended tag properties that Logix supports. And so when you create a tag in Logix, you can give it a name, a value, of course. You can give it a description. You can give it engineering units, min-max values, state 1, state 0 identifiers if it's a Boolean. In ViewDesigner or PanelView 5000, we know how to use all of that. And so it saves you a ton of time because you don't have to enter that information twice, once in your controller, once in your HMI. And it makes it so the controller is that one version of truth. If I'm not sure what engineering units I'm using on a value, well, it's what the controller says it is, right? Because there's no other place to look. That's what the value is. It also extends through alarms. One of the great things about PanelView 5000 is I can take a PanelView 5000 out of the box, say, hey, you're going to go talk to this controller, plug them together. I start getting alarms. There's literally nothing I have to do to make that happen. So we work with both the alarm instructions, the older alarm instructions that the controller had, and then the newer tag-based alarms, which is really nice in Logix. I can just right-click on any tag value I want in Logix and say, make this an alarm. And those things just automatically get sent to the PanelView 5000 and get displayed. We've got predefined screens for Alarm Summary, Alarm Manager, and now Alarm History. That just came out in our release last year. And really nice feature where, like I said, you put a project together, there's literally no alarm configuration you'd have to do on a PanelView 5000. You just use those predefined screens and you get alarm content. Just saves a ton of time. We do support up to 4,000 alarms per controller. So, PanelView 5510, then talking to 4 controllers can do 16,000 alarms. And alarm history can also be exported. See, alarm history supports up to 40,000 of your latest alarm transitions. And you can export that to removable media, an SD card or a USB drive that you would attach to your panel.
Can that be done on the fly?
Absolutely.
Oh, great. So can you?
Yep.
Is it like something you can do automatically, or do you press a button? Or
yeah, there's actually a predefined screen you can go to.
Oh, nice.
And you just say, I want to export to either a USB or an SD card, and you hit export, and it just does the export while everything is running.
Well, and I think that's one of the big differences with the PanelView 5000. There are these predefined objects and screens, almost like the old configuration menu and the PanelView Plus, if I'm kind of relating it correctly. But these are built in and they're accessible to your project. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. And that's the beautiful thing about it. We, like I said, we wanted to provide a lot of this content just out of the box that if you take a PanelView 5000, connect it to a Logix controller, you just start getting value. Now, a competitive HMI, you can create a lot of this stuff, but it's going to be a lot of work on your end to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the nice thing about the export too is we tend to export things in pretty open formats. So, for example, the alarm history exports as a zip CSV file. So you just drop it right into Excel, things like that.
Nice.
As far as screen development, one of the other big drivers that we had was usability. How do we make just standard workflows just a lot easier than what they've been in the past? But at the same time, how do we keep things flexible so that when you have to do weird things, you can do weird things? And so just to talk about some of the things we can do here, last year, our V7 release also introduced the concept of configurable update rates. So in the past, you could use any update rate you wanted as long as it was 500 milliseconds. But in V7 now, you can do 100 milliseconds, 250, or 500. So now you can get faster updates if you want to, show your operator a graphical indication of a motion move, or you want some rotation animation or something, you want to look smoother, that kind of thing. Another beautiful thing about PanelView 5000 is that we take advantage of some newer technologies, for example, things like scalable vector graphics. And what this means is that I don't have to worry about pixel counts the way I had to in the past. And because of scalable vector graphics, when I create a screen, I can create my screen, lay it out so things look nice. I grab elements out of the toolbox, drop them on the screen, make them big, they scale and look nice. I make them small, they scale and look nice. Let's say I'm doing that development for a 10-inch PanelView 5510, let's say, and I get this one-off job that I have to run this on a 15-inch 5510. I literally can take that 10-inch project, just download it to the 15-inch, and it just scales and runs. There's no relayout I have to do of anything. And so that's one of the really nice features, is that it just gets away from a lot of the worrying about pixel counts and things, because things just scale and work. We've got things like state tables. One of the things I like to point out always, that anything on a PanelView 5000 screen can be a multi-state indicator. So I can define a state table on anything with up to 2,500 different states, and do a stepwise walkthrough of changing the way something looks. We also have this concept of binding, and what that means is that when I drop an element on the screen, almost all of its properties are exposed, and so you can bind to those properties with either a tag or an expression. And so, if I want to change the level indication on a tank, well, any volumetric object automatically has a level property. You just bind a tag to that level property, and now you're doing a level animation. I want to do something weird. I want my tank that I'm changing the level on to fade in and out. Well, great. I bind to its opacity property and do that. I want it to move around on the screen. I can bind to its X and Y properties to make that happen. I want it to pulsate, grow and shrink. I can bind to its height and width properties and make it do that, right? And on and on. So by exposing all of that, you can do some really complex animations in that without having to write crazy scripts. It's just doing simple bindings to all of these exposed properties.
Which I got to say, anybody who's used like RS View or Vectortalk View, this is so cool, because there's a lot of limitations in those other products, and this just makes all the products seem like they're identical. They all can have, height, width, opacity, visibility. It's just, it's really cool. Check it out.
Yeah. The other thing I always point out is that anything can be a button. And so, if you're used to using ViewDesigner View ME, for example, and I want to make an object that I put on the screen into a button, well, usually what I have to do is drop a button object over on top of it, make it transparent, size it correctly.
Exactly.
And it's just a lot of work to do all of that. Well, in PanelView 5000, literally, I can take that element on the screen. I can say, right click, I want you to work like a button. And you can do that with anything. You bring your own images in and make them into buttons, whatever. There's this whole event command infrastructure that we have in ViewDesigner and PanelView 5000 that allows all of that. And it just makes it a lot more flexible. If you're familiar with View SE at all, it's somewhat similar to that, right? The concept that I can define different events, and those events can be, touch events. I press a button, I release a button. If I've got a keypad, PanelView 5000, it could be key presses. It could be state entry and state exit command or events. So when I set up a state table, I can say, hey, when my state table enters into a certain state, I want to execute a command. So, and then lastly, it could be what we call project events. And these are events that live outside of the context of any screen, that just kind of sit in the background and constantly look for an expression to evaluate true. And when it does, it executes whatever commands you've tied to that event.
And these events, they don't require any type of ActiveX, VBA type of.
No.
These are part of the objects.
It is just part of the objects, and like I said, so any of these events trigger, you can then define one or more commands that execute when the event triggers. So you can say, when I press this button, I want to write these 3 tags down to the controller. When I release the button, I want to navigate to a different screen. Whatever. Right? It's exceedingly flexible. Let's see some other things. So find and replace. Find and replace, you can scope to selected elements that you'd have on a screen, the whole screen itself, the entire project. So that's real handy. I'm trying to reuse content and then target it to different tags and things like that. Project administration. So when we talked about usability, this is one of the areas that we really focused on. How do we make it easier to do these common workflows that you do? And so first of all, emulation. If I need to test my application, but I don't have my physical PanelView 5000 yet, we have this whole emulator built into ViewDesigner. And literally, I just hit that button like you see on the screen there, and it launches a soft version of the PanelView 5000. And the nice thing about it is it's actually skinned to look like whatever panel you've said you're creating this project for. And that includes things like the physical navigation button is functional. If I have a keypad, PanelView 5000 with the left and right buttons on the side. Those are all functional. So I can test all of that right in my emulation environment.
Now, what does it do with the because if you don't have your Logix controller there on your desk, how does it handle that? Does it just use the default values or?
No, so it does to show values and do animations, it does need to be connected to a Logix controller.
Okay.
Now that could either be the one you're using in your plant, or we do have a separate emulator to controller path that you configure in your project properties.
Oh, all right.
Because a lot of times you'll do that testing with a different controller that's sitting at your desk. You don't want to
Oh, so
mess with
that's
the one
its
that's
own
on the plant.
path. So you have
That's
a
its own
separate
path.
path. Oh, great.
Yep. The other thing that's coming up, I'll make another plug for a product that's almost out, is our Factory Talk Echo product. And so that's a new emulator that we're making for the newer PanelView, or I'm sorry, the newer Logix controllers. And we work with that just fine also. So when that newer Factory Talk Echo product comes out, you can then do soft emulation of everything, right? So I could run my emulator in ViewDesigner to emulate the panel and have it talk to an emulated controller in Factory Talk Echo. Other things. So I'm working on creating my project in ViewDesigner, and now I want to get that downloaded to the panel. But once again, in the past, that was, I'd have to compile my application, make an MER runtime image of it, get out a transfer utility, download it to the panel, and then tell the panel to run it. All of that goes away with ViewDesigner and the PanelView 5000. I literally just hit download, and it downloads and runs. So it's much more akin to the workflow you'd have when working with a Logix controller, right? I just say I want to download the project, and it downloads and runs. So way easier to do. Uploads are similar. If I walk up to a PanelView 5000 and I'm not sure I've got the latest project that it's running, I can just do an upload, and now I've got the latest project it's running. Everything in ViewDesigner, when you save a project, it's saved as a single VPD file, just very similar, once again, an ACD file that you'd see in Logix. And so real easy to move projects around. If I want to send my VPD file to one of my colleagues to do some work on, I just email them the file. I mean, it's nothing to it.
So there's no more concern about the APA versus the MER and all of that.
Yeah, there's no such thing. And then we've got project verifications. So in ViewDesigner, I can always run a verify, and it tells me if I've got anything syntactically wrong in my project. And then a lot of built-in HMI device tags to do things like, show how much memory you've used, show what version the panel is running at. And most of these are actually displayed on predefined screens that we already have. So, one of the nice things, if I ever just go to my predefined setting screens, if I need to call tech support or something, I can pull up the HMI device settings screen, and it tells me, hey, here's what catalog numbers you're running on this panel. Here's what firmware rev it's at, right? All of that information is just there for you.
And that's huge because we used to have to beg developers to put a go to config button on the screen. And when you hit that, you shut your entire project down, including
Right.
all the alarming and all the data logging. So, if you're looking at this, coming from that point, that is a huge benefit just to be able to display that data without shutting the entire project down.
Exactly. Yeah, all those setting screens are just built into your default project. All right, some other things that we put into this. So when we looked at developing this product, one of the things we really looked at was, a lot of projects that you look at, they've always got rows of navigation buttons along the bottom of the screen, for example, and that works and everything, but it's a pain, right? Because you got to create all those buttons, you got to put them on every screen. If I need to maintain that, so in other words, I want to move some screens around, well, now I got to touch every single screen, fix all the navigation buttons, and they take up a bunch of room on my screen. And so we figured there's got to be a better way to do that. So we came up with this whole navigation button concept. And the way this works is in ViewDesigner, is I'm creating my screens, I just drag them up into this navigation menu folder, and it creates a shortcut to that screen, which is just a link to it. And so at runtime then, those shortcuts show up when I press this navigation menu button. This menu slides up. The operator can pick where they want to go. It navigates, and then that menu slides out of the way. And so, number one, it's a lot easier to set up. It's way easier to maintain. If I want to move around how some of these screens get displayed, I just move them in this folder. It's really easy. And then I'm not taking up all that real estate. And so maybe I can get away with using a smaller panel than I would have had to use in the past.
Now I got to ask: this isn't on the 5310, is it? This button?
Yes.
Oh, it is.
So the button isn't, but if you look in the system banner,
Oh, all right.
by default, there's a soft button for that on the system banner.
Okay.
And so you get exactly the same functionality. You just don't have the hard physical button on the 5310.
Okay, got it.
Yep. Language switching, support typical things like language switching, support up to 20 different languages. Displays. So displays can be full screen or they can be what we call pop-ups. And so pop-ups are really handy if I want to, press on a motor or something and get a little pop-up that comes up that gives me more information about the motor and lets me jog it or what have you. We support what we call add-on graphics. So if you're familiar with global objects in ViewME, ViewSE, somewhat similar concept. The idea that, if I want to take some of my own, take some toolbox elements out and put those together in a way that, creates a graphical image of something that I want to use over and over again, I can do that by creating an add-on graphic. And this gets really powerful if you start taking advantage of that linking with Logix. And so we understand Logix data types. And so I could do things like, let's say I create an add-on instruction in Logix. Well, that add-on instruction has its own data type. I can create an add-on graphic that links to that data type. And now every time I instantiate that add-on graphic, I just point it to a different data type instance. And all my data lines up. And so, that knowledge of Logix integration just really helps with that kind of thing. Other predefined content, when we talk about, I mentioned the system banner that you see at the top of that screen there. That's a configurable object that by default is there on every screen. You can turn it off if you want, but you can also modify this. So it has default content on it that just provides you things like an indication for alarms and forward and back buttons and a logon button and the soft navigation menu button. You can put your own logo on there if you want. Make this bigger if you want even. But it's a really handy way of just having, once again, all that predefined content available for you on the screen, but then also, putting anything that's really important that you want an operator to always see on every screen. It's a great place to do that. Then the last feature I'll talk about here is really cool. It's our high-speed button capability. Because it's our controller, it's our HMI, we can do these kinds of things. So in Logix Designer, you can actually put a PanelView 5000 in the I/O tree of the controller. And what that does is it sets up a high-speed I/O link with the panel. So in other words, the panel looks kind of like a remote I/O rack at that point. And so you can have up to 256 buttons in a controller that work with soft buttons on the screen. And there's this new instruction called HMI-BC that you put on your input of your rung, and it ties to a button you'd have on the screen on the PanelView 5000. And what that lets you now do is you can press that button, you have sub 100 millisecond response time talking down to the controller. And so in the past, to do any kind of jog operation like that, I always had to use physical buttons to do it to get the kind of speeds I needed. But now you don't have to do that. So it could save me all the cost of buying buttons and cutting holes in my panel and buying I/O cards to wire them into and doing all that wiring. All of that can go away. And so it's a really neat thing that you can do with the PanelView 5000. You just can't do with other HMIs.
Yeah, we've found in the field that one of the most likely reasons for an HMI to get smashed is a really slow response time on a button. So this eliminates that because you really have to have sub 1 second. You have to have a quarter second or the third of a second response time to have a 1 second round trip. So when you press that button, you have to have that motor come on and have that indicator come back within a second. Any longer than that, operators start getting real punchy, and I mean that in a physical way.
Right.
Hey, I wanted to ask you a question back on the add-on graphics, which are,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the viewers and listeners are familiar with the global objects. One of the things that we had to do a lot with global objects was parameters, and I could see add-on graphics replacing a lot of that for certain instances. Is if somebody was a heavy parameter user, where they
Mm-hmm.
did parameter passing, is that something that's in this product, or would you be kind of pushing
Yeah.
them towards add-on graphics?
No. So parameters are available. We just do it a little differently. We do it a lot more intuitively.
Okay.
And so you can do this on screens. If I want to do reusable screens, I can do it in add-on graphics. basically I can create my own custom properties for both screens and add-on graphics.
Okay.
And so I could say, for example, hey, I've created this reusable screen that I use with mixers in my plant. And so, it's a mixer detail screen, shows information about the mixer. And I could create my own custom property for that screen that maybe I'd call the mixer tag. And so by naming the property, it's a lot easier than trying to remember, what does £1 mean? What does £2 mean?
Oh,
Well,
yeah.
it's a name, right? The other neat thing about it is I can type it. Because we understand Logix data types, I could say, well, my mixer tag property has to be of type mixer. Because I've got a mixer UDT in my Logix controller that for every mixer I've got, it has all the elements, all the tag members that have all the data that a mixer does. And so when I instantiate a call to that screen, then I'm going to call my mixer detail screen, and it knows that it needs a mixer tag. It'll actually pre-filter the database for me and only show me things of type mixer because it knows it's supposed to be of type mixer. And I pick the mixer instance I want, and I'm done. So it's just a lot easier to do that kind of parameterization, particularly when you're taking advantage of Logix user-defined types.
That makes a lot of sense. I think those of us who've done any serious use of parameters in FactoryTalk View, that's what we do. We typically only use #1 and we send in a prefix, and that
Yep.
prefix is usually the beginning of a UDT that has
Right.
all our sub elements like level and pressure and all that.
Exactly.
So you've kind of built that in there it made it easier.
Yep. Made it easier because they can be named and they can be typed. So it just makes all that workflow a lot easier.
Nice.
And then, some of the other things with the PanelView 5000 is that it does actually have a pretty locked down operating system. You can't get to it. And so things like, worrying about patching, worrying about, virus protection and that kind of go away because there's just none of that there. A lot of things that we can do on here that maybe you'd think would be more like a PC. So email notifications, it's built into there. There's a send email command. Once again, taking advantage of that whole event command infrastructure. So we can set up a connection to an email server, do emails when, let's say a project event fires off that, hey, my machine just entered a fault state. I can send an email out to my maintenance people. PDF viewers. So we got PDF viewer built into it. So I want to display PDF information to my operator. I can do that. Data logging and trending. You can log up to 1.296 billion records on the PanelView 5000. We actually log to the SD card, which is how we can log so many different values. You can export that. Once again, data logs, just like I mentioned with alarm history, data logs export as a CSV file. So I can drop them right into Excel. Security, the way that works is you can define multiple users. Every user gets a role. And then everything is role-based. So I can say, as a screen, I want somebody that has the operator role. Well, maybe this is a maintenance screen. So the operator people maybe can look at it. They get read-only. But if somebody logs on and then gets the maintenance role, they're allowed to actually change things on that screen. And so I could do that on a screen-by-screen basis. Because we have a system that tells you the current role of the current logged on user, you can even take that down to an individual element on the screen. So you could say, for example, I'm going to disable this button on a screen if somebody with a role of operator logs on, but if the administrator logs on, then they have access to that button. We support auto logout, so if somebody walks away from a panel, we can automatically log out. And then we also have this special role called the guest role. And what that does is the guest is the user that's logged on when nobody is logged on. And that has its own role, right? So I can say, hey, when everybody walks away from this panel, I could either say, well, it's going to go to the home screen and it's read only. So whereas my panel is very locked down. If nobody's logged on, you really can't do anything on it. Or I could say, hey, in my facility, I've got a certain small set of screens that I want anybody that walks up to this panel to be able to get to. Well, you can do that too, right? So it's very flexible as far as how you want to set that up.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back. We used to use the default role. If any FactoryTalk View users from way back or RSView, that default role was so usable, and so
Hmm.
having that role that user that when nobody's logged in, it goes back to is great. So just to ask you a question, when you do that auto log out, I know a lot of people have wanted to. Let's say I'm on the engineering screen, I'm changing set points, and then I hit log out. Is there any way to redirect them back to some other window to get them out of that engineering screen, or how
Yeah.
would you
So
deal with that?
yep. So remember what I said. So the guest user is the user when nobody's logged on. And so let's run through that same example you just said. I'm on some engineering screen where I can, tweak values on my machine, and I walk away, and an auto logout happens, or I purposely log out. So what happens is the guest user now becomes the user. What role does the guest user have? If the guest user doesn't have read access to that screen you're on right now, it goes back to the home screen.
Okay, good. So that's the default behavior. Good, good.
Yep.
All right.
Okay, and then a few things just to finish up on. So things like one of the things we've recently improved in our V7 release last year was the ability to download over really slow connections, do downloads and uploads. And we actually heard this more from people last year because obviously with the pandemic and everything, a lot of people were working remotely. And what we found out is that people were having trouble doing downloads over like a really slow VPN connection. And so we made some improvements to this last year where um, we actually use a large packet size when we are downloading over Ethernet, and it just gives us a faster download. But what we're finding out is that over a really slow network, I'm talking like a 200K network, right? You can start getting timeouts on that. And so we always start trying to download now with the large packet size. If that fails for some reason, we'll switch to the smaller packet size and continue to try to do the download.
Nice.
And so now we're finding we can do that kind of thing over even like I said, a 200K type connection. We've got some newer tags available for color correction. So if you get your terminal, particularly your particular lighting conditions and that kind of thing, and you need to tweak the colors on the screen, you can do that now. We talked about email notification, VNC support. So if I need to remotely connect into my panel and see what's happening on the panel, I can do that. That is password protected also. And then another neat feature we have is the ability to load both our project and even the firmware on the panel without having a PC available. And so what this is really handy for you workflows, like let's say, for example, I'm an OEM and I put this new machine together and I ship it out, and my end user is starting to use it and comes back with some comments that, hey, this one screen, our operators find it really confusing. And you look at it and redesign it and come out with a better design for it. And well, now you want to get that out to that end user. Well, they don't know how to use ViewDesigner. They might not even have it. And so what you can do is right in ViewDesigner, you just do a file save as VPDR, and it creates a runtime image version of that. That's just a file. I could email it to the end user. They put it on an SD card or USB drive, walk out to the panel, plug it in. Once again, go to a predefined screen. There's nothing you have to create to make this happen. They go to a predefined screen, browse, sees your new file on the USB drive, let's say, selects it and says load. And it just does it's like doing a download from ViewDesigner. So it just loads and runs on the panel. And so it's a handy way to do that. You can even do firmware with that. So, if you come out, let's say we come out with that new V8 version of firmware later this year, and you want to take advantage of some new feature on that, you can once again send your user the updated project file and a V8 DMK file that you would download off of PCDC. And then once again, when the user goes to load that project, it's going to come back and say, hey, that's a V8 project. Your terminal's right now at V7. Is it okay if I update the firmware? They hit continue. It'll do a firmware update, then load the project and run. Real easy to use and a nice way to get things updated without having to pull out a computer somewhere.
That's pretty awesome. I guess I got a question though. If I gave that, what was the name of the file that was auto load? The
VPDR.
VPDR. Yeah. If I give that to somebody, my worry is that's like an MER, like I can't reopen it on another PC.
That's correct. You can't.
Okay. So that would be only that wouldn't be the file of default that you'd want to share with people. That wouldn't replace, like if they required an editable copy of the project, you don't want to give them the VPDR.
Yeah, correct. You'd give them just the normal VPD file
Okay.
if you wanted to share files that way.
Perfect.
Now, the one thing I will say is, we've had a couple customers ask this. Well, what if I've lost my project and all I've got is a VPDR?
Mm-hmm.
Well, fine, load it on a panel and do an upload.
Oh,
Now you got a
perfect.
VPD back.
Now, but here's what happens. So, do they have to have the exact same panel?
No.
So if
Nope.
they had a 10-inch and all they have right now is a 7-inch, they could
Yep.
load it onto the 7-inch.
They'll load it on there. It'll scale and work great, and they could just do an upload.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And then some other things with diagnostics. So, we talked about that system banner. One of the things I didn't mention is on that system banner, there are pre-built diagnostic indicators for network and controller status. And once again, it's our network, it's our controller. We ought to be able to tell you about it. And so if something goes wrong with my controller, let's say I leave it in program mode or it gets a major fault, I'll actually get a controller icon that'll light up on my system banner. And I press that, and it takes me to a predefined controller status page that tells me, okay, here's what controller I was talking to. It's on this Ethernet path. It was running this project. It has this firmware loaded into it. Its current mode is run or remote run or program. All of that information is just displayed for you. And so similar thing for network. Let's say I'm running a DLR network and I get a network break. Well, in DLR, it's fault tolerant. How do we even know that happened? Right? Because everything keeps running, which is great, but I'd kind of like to know about it because the next break might shut me down. Well, once again, it's our network. So if we get a DLR break, we pop up an indicator on the system banner that tells you, hey, there's an issue with your network. And you press that, it takes you to a network status page that tells you, hey, you have a DLR break, or I've got a duplicate IP address, or right. So a lot of this stuff just is inherently in there just to make troubleshooting and getting your project running a lot easier. We do that with error messages too. So, one of the complaints you'll hear about people using, PanelView Plus, let's say, is that, they get wireframes. Well, why do I have wireframes? And you're always trying to figure that out. Well, in PanelView 5000, if we have an issue, reading some value out of the controller, for example, yes, we'll wireframe something, so we're not going to show you bad data, but that's also a touch point. And so I can press that and get an error flag right on the screen that tells me, hey, you were trying to read this tag from this controller path, and either we can't find that tag in the controller or its external access property is set to none and you're not allowed to read it. Right. So it just makes it a lot easier to just right on the screen, right at real time, troubleshoot things and get things running. Okay, so that's kind of a quick run through of what we have today in there. And like I said, it's a lot of I kind of touched on the main things. It's integration with Logix. How do we make it so you take our controller, you take our HMI, you put them together, and you just get all this stuff that happens. Alarms automatically showing up. Understanding Logix data types, right? All of that just happening. It's a lot of ease of use. How do we make it just a lot easier to do downloads, to do uploads, to save a project as a new file name, to send my project to somebody else to work on, right? All of that just gets a lot easier. And then taking advantage of some of those newer technologies like scalable vector graphics to just automatically scale screens. So, those are kind of the main value propositions behind the whole, PanelView 5000 and ViewDesigner. And so with that, what I'd like to do is finish up with, like I said, just a quick sneak peek of, hey, what are we working on right now? And so what will you see later this year? And so that's our V8 release is what's in development right now. We're just hitting code complete on this. And so looking really forward to getting this out here in the next few months. And so the main features on this, web browser, 500 screen support, automatic diagnostics, those are the big ones. A couple smaller things, clearing a specific data log. We've got a clear data log command today that clears all the data logs, but this is just a little enhancement to it. Lets you clear out a specific data log while the other ones keep going.
You can have more than one data log running?
Yeah, you can have up to 3 different data logs running.
Oh, that's great. Each of them
So
can be 2 billion? Did you say 2 billion?
1.296 billion records across all of the data logs.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So basically that's 250 values that I could log at a half a second for a month is what that works out to.
Nice.
Yeah. The keypad location configuration is also kind of a nice little feature. And so let me give you some details on some of these. So the web browser, once again, this starts getting into some of those features that we can only do on the 5510. So the web browser is not supported on the 5310. And so some of the some of the neat new capabilities on this is first of all, it just really expands the types of information that you can display to your users now. The three main use cases we heard from this a lot were, hey, I just want to display web pages to my operator. Either it's I've created some HTML help files, or I've got a parts ordering system, or something like that I need to let the operator look at. As long as that stuff's available in HTML5 format, great, we can display that. Other use cases we've heard a lot, videos. I want to display little 1 or 2 minute videos to my operator showing them here's how you do some maintenance on the machine, or here's how you load parts, or here's how you clear a jam. Right, so you can create those little videos. We support MP4 videos on this, display those to your operators. And then the other one is IP cameras. I've got an area in my facility that's just hard to get to, or it's dangerous. And so what I might want to do is mount an IP camera on there and provide my operator a window into what's happening over, in that area of the plant. And so, we support H.264 streaming or motion JPEG streaming, either one, with lots of different IP cameras. To launch the web browser is this new open web browser command. So once again, like I said, taking advantage of that whole command event infrastructure. And you can display content from lots of different locations, out on the internet. You can obviously things for your local internet servers. I can load content onto an SD card or USB drive. So if I want to, have a set of videos that I always have available for my operator as an OEM, I could, put those on the SD card, and now the operator can look at those, that kind of thing. And then obviously we don't want our operators sitting there watching cat videos all day. And so you can set up a customizable list of locations, an allowed location list, and do by role and say, operators are only allowed to look at these specific, URLs. A maintenance person can look at these URLs, and on and so forth. And to give a little bit more detail on what that looks like. So the open web browser command, like I said, you can do an HTTPS address. If you've got local content in your SD card or USB, that's just SD:/, for example. You get different options for your top bar. You can see these on the right here, that I can have the web browser pop up. Basically, it's kind of a kiosk mode, so there is no URL bar at the top. I can have it pop up where it only gives me a read-only indication of what the URL is, or I could have a more normal toolbar like I'd expect in a browser. I've got forward and back buttons. I could type in my own URL in here. I do some scaling and have an X button to close the browser. This close on lost focus is an interesting property. So what that lets you do is, let's say that I've got a screen where I can start and stop a remote conveyor and maybe change the conveyor speed, but I can't see it. So I've got an IP camera set up out there to show me that remote conveyor. Well, I can bring up the browser in a small window that overlays my screen, and I can say, turn off that close on lost focus. So even though it's a pop-up window overlaying my screen, I can still interact with the screen below it. So I can go and start and stop that conveyor and change its speed and watch all that happening remotely on my IP camera view. And then this X and Y and width and height, they're just, if I want to position that browser somewhere specifically on my screen to do that kind of thing. And all of these are bindable, right? So if I want to, have different videos pop up depending on machine state, that kind of thing, I can do all kinds of neat things like that. We talked about allowed locations, so here's where you can set that up. So it's just a new configuration in ViewDesigner. And then also a ports configuration. There's certain devices that maybe you need to open up a specific port to get the data from them correctly. So that capability is there now also. Certificate management is there. Everything's moving more to secure capabilities. So, if you got specific HTTPS URLs that your operators need to get to, that you need to load certificates on, you can do that right at runtime. And we did that because more and more you see security where, web certificates tend to expire after 6 months or so. And so rather than make you download a whole new project to update your certificates, you can do that at runtime right at the panel. Just load their certificates onto an SD card or USB drive, plug them in, go to this predefined screen and say, load these certificates. Another really cool capability of this is that there are a ton of Rockwell products out there that have built-in web pages. And so if I go to connect to a Logix controller, for example, it has a built-in web page. And we can display that information on a PanelView 5000. Sometimes it's really handy to help troubleshoot what's going on in my controller, or static switches or power monitors. Right, there's sensors out there that we have that have built-in web pages. So lots of different capabilities like that. Here I'm showing FactoryTalk Analytics for devices. If I've got that set up, I can display that data right on a PanelView 5000. Even weird things like, hey, I've got a FactoryTalk View SE system out there. It's got a viewpoint server set up. I can display SE screens on a PanelView 5000, right? So just lots of neat capabilities there. And then just some things to keep in mind using the browser. Like I said, it is only available on the 5510. To close the browser, normally if you're using that full top bar, you got the X on the browser top bar to close it. If you don't have that, it'll always close if you do a navigation. If you press the nav button, it'll close the browser. There's also a close web browser command, so you can make your own buttons to do that. Some other things just to point out that we kind of took care of. So let's say you navigate to some web page that's, either it's just it's a malignant web page. It's just trying to do bad things and use up all your memory, or it's just a very complex web page. Eventually you're going to run the panel out of memory. And so what we do is we actually sense that, and we'll actually shut the browser page down if it's starting to use more memory than what's available on the panel. And then some other things, we can still emulate, but if you do an open web browser when you're running emulation, it'll actually open your computer's default browser. And we did that to let you test your URL links that you put in the open web browser command, but we're not supporting the built-in browser on when you're running on a Windows platform. And then just a couple other things to point out. The browser doesn't support PDF files, but we have the built-in PDF viewer. So it's just a different way to do that. And then it doesn't support downloads. And we did that explicitly because we don't want some kind of malicious website to be able to download content to the PanelView 5000. The other really big feature in here is 500 screen support. And so now the PanelView 5510 can support up to 500 screens. The PanelView 5310 is still limited to that 100 screens. The other thing we did is we got rid of the 50 pop-up limitation. And so in the past, even with 100 screens, only 50 of those could be pop-ups. Now you could have you need one home screen, so 499 pop-ups you could have in a project now. And then because we're just displaying a lot more content on screen, we did a lot of under the hood re-architecting of things. And so you'll see when you move to V8, a lot of things just get faster. And so in ViewDesigner, things get faster, saves are a lot faster, find replace is a ton faster, opening projects, launching the emulator, just a lot of things like that just got faster in ViewDesigner. At runtime, things also got a lot faster. So you'll see screen switching being faster, doing downloads got a little faster. Like I said, a lot of that was just a lot of the architecture work that we did. And then the third really big feature is automatic diagnostics. And this was a new feature that Logix actually introduced last year in their V33 release. And so here's where we're picking this up. And the whole idea behind automatic diagnostics is that, once again, it's our control system. We ought to be able to tell you about things when things go bad in our control system. And so that same kind of concept with alarms, where I take a PanelView 5000, I plug it into a Logix controller, I just start getting alarms. Same thing with automatic diagnostics. I plug into a Logix controller, I just start getting diagnostic information. And the way this will show up is on the system banner, there's this new indicator for diagnostics. And what that means is that, let's say a controller's talking to an I/O card, and it's a diagnostic I/O card that has things like wire off detection. So if channel 3, the wire falls off, well, now I'll actually get that indication automatically. There's nothing I have to do to make this work. I get this little indicator that would pop up on my system banner. I press it. It takes me to a diagnostic screen here that shows me, hey, at this time on this device, you got this error message, wire off detection on channel 3, right? And I just automatically get this. So now it's just way easier to know when things happen to my control system and to know how to go fix things. There's also a history element for that. So if I need to go look at, what were the past 1,000 diagnostic events I've received, that's available in there. And then automatic diagnostics are automatically supported in multiple languages in the controller. And so basically it's English, then Portuguese, French, Italian, German, Spanish, Chinese, Japanese, and Korean. So if you language switch on the panel to any of those languages, you'll also see the messages language switch. It's a really neat new feature. And then lastly, just to finish up with that keypad location configuration. And so once again, one of the smaller features, but we really did that to tie into the new browser feature that we did. The idea that I could bring up a small browser window showing a video, showing an IP camera stream, and yet still get on the screen behind it to do things like change a conveyor speed, right? So I can press that numeric input, and then as part of the numeric input configuration, define where that keypad pops up on my screen. And so to make sure it's not overlaying a browser window or being behind it, for example.
No, that's good too, because sometimes you'll have multiple inputs on the screen, and it's nice to have the keypad. If the input's on the left, the keypad's on the left. If what you're typing in's on the right, the keypad's on the right. So no, that's great.
Yep. Okay, so that's a quick run through of what you'll see coming next. And like I said, that's right now looking at October, November timeframe this year.
That's going to release separate of a major 5000 release, right? Studio 5000?
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Well, Keith, thank you so much for coming on the show and showing us all that. That is some great stuff. It's pretty exciting to get this update, and I'm sure the audience will really enjoy it and give us some great feedback. But thank you again for putting this together and taking the time out of your day to come on the show.
Well, I really appreciate your time. It's always great to get the word out about a neat product that we've been working on.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that. I know I did. And I want to thank Keith for taking time out of his busy week to put that presentation together and bring us all up to speed on the PanelView 5000 line of HMIs. With that said, if you're watching on the blog or on YouTube, please consider giving us a like and a sub. And if you're listening to the audio-only edition on iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, or somewhere else, please consider subscribing there and giving us a 5-star review, because that really helps us expand our audience as well as helps us find new presenters to come on the show. With that said, if you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always find me over at automation.locals.com. And with all that said, I just want to wish you a very happy, safe, and healthy week. And until next time, my friends, peace.